Before we get started, this video was long awaited. It's something that I have wanted to do for a while now. It is going to be a fun as hell rabbit hole, and thank God someone requested it for a subscribe star review. For multiple reasons. Just know that we're here to talk about what is easily one of the most influential pieces of work out there, and not just the original movie either. It's time to solve the Riddle of Steel.
Conan, what is best in life? Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
I am the axe, so stop you dead in your tracks. I am the sword, I bring the fear of the Lord.
Conan the Barbarian. So right from the get-go, there is a lot to talk about. Conan the Barbarian is the 1982 film adaptation of the Pulp Fiction character created by Robert E. Howard, directed by John Milius, and co-written by John Milius and Oliver Stone, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger in the titular role. It serves as an introduction to the character, the world, and gives a rundown for the various adventures that he gets up to, whether from acting as a thief looking for gold, a gladiator seeking glory, or a blood-stained savage seeking vengeance on the man who wronged him. It can't cover every detail since the Conan mythos is fucking huge, but it manages to give you all you need to understand what he's all about. Now, who exactly is Conan? As stated, he's a Pulp Fiction character created by Robert E. Howard, a warrior traversing a fantasy land exploring new and exciting places, meeting various people, and killing them. He's a power fantasy character. You read a Conan story because you like seeing him end up in a ton of different situations. He can be outsmarted, betrayed, bested by a strong opponent, and the whole time Conan has to find a way to win. Sometimes he's able to get a stunning victory, something that shakes the world to the core. Other times his victory is just that he managed to scrape out of a situation without dying. And this isn't even talking about the setting itself. Tolkien took over the fantasy standard once Lord of the Rings exploded into popularity, but before that, you had Conan, and his world was actually a lot different than you would expect. There's no forest full of elves or mountains full of dwarves. Conan's world is more of like an Iron Age Sumerian-style culture, even dipping into Mongolian steppes more than once. It's also a very ruthless world, full of monsters, demons, cults, bandits, Lovecraftian horrors. Pretty much anything in Conan's world wants you dead, and he, as a character, is exactly as violent in return. That Lovecraftian horrors point isn't an exaggeration either. Conan is actually canon to the Lovecraft mythos. Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft were very good friends, and would insert references to each other in their stories all the time. You see, while H.P. Lovecraft was really into the idea of cosmicism, the idea that humanity does not matter to the grand scheme of the cosmos, Robert was on the opposite spectrum. Conan is meant to be a very empowering character, not just the physical strength aspect, but all around he's a very inspiring character, written to be the pinnacle of man, the ultimate badass, an unwavering warrior that's willing to stare an absolute nightmare in the eye and make it kneel. Because Robert E. Howard very much enjoyed stories that emphasize the strength of human spirit, that if you're willing to man up to a challenge, then it can be overcome, no matter what it may be.
Something that makes his death all the more tragic, committing suicide after struggling with physical and mental health issues for decades, thrown into a deep depression when his mother began to succumb to a terminal illness, which ended up fracturing the budding relationship he had with Noveline Price, who left him for a mutual friend. Howard intended on his whole family leaving the world together, but his father didn't realize what he was planning. Sadly, left alone in the world once his wife and son were gone. Howard loved powerful characters because he knew that he himself was weak and struggled, dealing with a heart condition since he was a child and a fractured family home due to his parents' divorce. So he wanted to make someone that the common man who had similar issues could look up to as a pillar of strength. You could even see Conan as something of a self-insert. Howard was not your average writer. He had a very large build growing up as a country boy in rural Texas and had interests in sports and bodybuilding, being a very big fan of boxing in particular. Price herself was shocked upon meeting him as he broke every stereotype of a writer that she expected, something that makes the detail about Conan all the more interesting. A brilliant mind in the body of something most consider a brainless savage.
As stated, Conan is canon to the Lovecraft mythos, and he outright won against some of the entities in it. Now at first glance, you might assume that Conan is just a blood-drinking savage, a mindlessly violent killer who's only good at dealing death. and some of the weaker aspects of the franchise can definitely point in that direction. We're absolutely talking about this later. But you see, that's not Conan at all. In fact, the character is extremely intelligent. He speaks multiple languages fluently. He's a warrior poet, someone very good at killing others, yet not just a mindless ape, which is something he actually uses to his advantage more than a few times. Conan, as a character, is meant to point out the hypocrisy of civilization. The nobles he runs into all see him as just a stinking barbarian, yet a lot of the time, he figures them out within just a few conversations, and they end up being cowardly, insidious, or downright more vicious than the man they see as subhuman. This isn't to say he's perfect, not by any means. Conan can easily be tricked by playing into his pride, or his greed, or especially his lust. He very much enjoys the company of women, and more than a few times the thing that damn near kills him has been a woman manipulating him. He's not Johnny Bravo or Rio from City Hunter, where he just becomes a doofus in the presence of a lady he likes. It's more that he just sort of naturally lets his guard down. If he knows not to trust her, then he won't, but a beautiful woman approaching him and giving no obvious red flags, yeah, it's like a mouse to cheese. Guy just can't help himself. Conan is a very complicated character, obviously very self-serving and having absolutely no qualms about killing, yet he still has a strict code he follows. He's a very honorable warrior, and he sticks to this code even if it puts him at risk. His love of women extends beyond just sex. He will actively go out of his way to save a woman who he sees is in danger, even if he almost dies in the process. Once again, sort of hinting at a contradiction. Civilized characters usually just abandon others to die, while Conan still has that old-style chivalry to him. He can be an ass about it, but he's absolutely gonna save who he thinks can be saved. Now, the obvious thing to mention is that Conan isn't the first barbarian-style character Robert E. Howard created. Kull the Atlantean is quite literally meant to be the proto-Conan. In fact, it's outright implied that they take place in the same setting, and Kull is even an ancestor to Conan. Still, Kull ended up being nowhere near as popular as Conan. That's not to say you shouldn't check out Kull, it's just that it was the lead up to the thing that became a literal cultural icon. Because to list off all the things inspired by Conan would take actual days. Conan the Barbarian, being over 100 years old at this point, has influenced God knows how many different contemporaries, franchises, songs, art styles, even entire genres of fantasy. Conan became an icon to sword and sorcery fantasy, a much more explosive and over-the-top style than Tolkien's clinical, detailed world building. Conan, while also having a ton of detail, relies much more on rule of cool and spectacle. If you want to run down on the lore, check out Grimdark Half Off. The guy has entire guides explaining the cultures and even religions the setting uses. All you have to know for this video is that Conan the Barbarian was heavy metal dark fantasy before heavy metal was a thing. In fact, you'd be surprised how many metal bands out there directly reference Conan or try to essentially style their music to be like a soundtrack for the guy. The Sword has used titles of Conan stories as songs. Manowar is so Conan inspired they've outright put him on the cover of albums more than once. There's even a band from England just straight up called Conan, and they're pretty fucking good too. And this is just a quick rundown off the top of my head. This isn't even talking about the style of a Conan story and how that became influential. Each story sort of runs through a similarish plot structure of, fantasy badass warrior arrives in a new place, slips into the culture a little bit, gets dragged into a larger situation, usually killing assloads of people in the process, all to ride off into the sunset and do it all over again. The serial format. This became such a standardized formula for pulp stories because it's piss easy to just come up with a new plot that follows the same structure over and over again. That's not to say Conan invented the entire structure, but Robert E. Howard basically did. He wrote a ton of pulp stories. Not just Conan, it's just the biggest one that got popular. And really, it's something that perfectly fits what it's going for. You introduce new elements as you please and do whatever you want with the cast you introduce. Maybe they're gone by the time the next story's thought up. If they're dead, don't have to worry about reintroducing them. Alive, maybe make mention of them or let them show up for a cameo, because there are recurring characters who show up in Conan stories. Most famously, Red Sonia, who has her own line of stories all to herself, being a warrior woman traversing the land seeking adventure and glory much like Conan. And this is where things get complicated. See, contrary to what you might think, Red Sonia, at least the one you're aware of, isn't actually the Red Sonia thought up by Robert E. Howard. That Red Sonia only appeared in the historical fiction story, The Shadow of the Vulture, which took place around 1529 or so, during a war between Hungary and the Ottomans, and she was a gunslinger out for revenge against the Sultan, a far cry from what's referred to as the Hyborian Age, which is the setting Conan resides in. No, Red Sonia was transplanted into the world of Conan by Marvel, funny enough. You see, they bought the rights to a bunch of Robert E. Howard stories and ran their own line of Conan the Barbarian comics. Some were just straight up adaptations of stories, others were comics and not really made by Robert in any way, since this was long after his death. Red Sonia, the comic character, was created by Roy Thomas and Barry Smith in 1973. It's actually kind of funny because her prevalence in the comics is all over the place. She's basically meant to be a mirror to Conan, a warrior woman not taken seriously because of her gender, instead of just being seen as a savage, even though ironically she is more hot-tempered than Conan. though a lot of this is due to her backstory. Conan's backstory was that his village was raided when he was a small child, and he was sold into slavery, forced to fight and grow stronger to survive. Red Sonia is similar, but she actually suffered a village raid when she was already a young adult. Her family is killed, and after failing to wield her brother's sword properly, she is raped by bandits. She begs the gods for vengeance, and the Red Goddess Skithach answers, giving her incredible strength and fighting skills. Under the condition, she never lie with a man, until she finds one who can defeat her in combat. Not gonna lie, for not being created by Robert himself, the Marvel version of Red Sonia is really close to something he would have written. She's a fun character, bickering with Conan and sharing a friendly rivalry with him that can change depending on the story. Sometimes they're really good friends, and they're working together. Other times, they are trying to decapitate the other. Now, if you want the actual warrior woman that Howard intended, you get Bulette. She is a pirate that runs into Conan multiple times in the stories, and ends up becoming sort of his true love. You also have Valeria, who is more widely known due to her showing up in the movie. You get the idea, there's a lot of warrior women in Conan the Barbarian, and he sleeps with pretty much all of them. Robert E. Howard actually likes the idea of badass women quite a bit. Red Sonia isn't 100% canon. Most people accept her because she just kind of fits into the world pretty well, and she's already been in it so long because she was introduced in the 70s. Now, the Marvel side of Conan is way too big to mention, and isn't really meant to be taken seriously. He's had crossovers with characters you'd never expect. He teamed up with Scarlet Witch one time, fought Thor and Captain America, Red Sonia possessed Mary Jane. You get the idea, he's been all over the Marvel universe. But I don't really consider Conan a Marvel character. The guy is at his best in the Hyborian Age, traveling the land, and kicking metric boatloads of ass. And most everybody agrees with this. It's fun to see him beat up Spider-Man for his lunch money, but you don't want that to be standard. Everyone loves Conan when he's in his own setting, using his sword to take down a snake cult. Hell, Conan's even went on to inspire manga, though more on that towards the end. Primal, the animated series by Genndy Tartakovsky, takes massive influence from Conan the Barbarian. From Spear's design to the world, everything bleeds Conan vibes. Hell, the names of the two protagonists, Spear and Fang, are direct references to a short story by Robert E. Howard, Spear and Fang, which follows a caveman trying to survive a violent prehistoric world. Tartakovsky himself even outright said Conan the Barbarian was an influence on the series, though that's something that fans could probably tell from a mile away anyway. The short-lived action comedy series Wayne made direct references to Conan, making the protagonist a big fan of the character and comparing him to the Barbarian on more than a few occasions.
Thanks for not being a big pussy about all this.
The Barbarian class in Dungeons & Dragons takes massive influence from the character. Hell, Baldur's Gate 3 is basically a full-on Conan video game if you pick it, and this isn't even talking about the actual dedicated video games, of which there are a few. Hell, Conan Exiles is still receiving updates and expansion packs as we speak. You get the point. This is a pretty big franchise. Really, the movie is just sort of there in the middle of it all. It was a massive cult film for sure, but in the larger scheme of things, it's just another piece of a much larger puzzle. But it's a pretty big piece most everybody can recognize. If it's not obvious, I love the character. He's just the epitome of drunk fun. A fearless ass kicker that is just fun to watch. The stories aren't trying to impress anybody or be smarter than what they really are. They're pulp stories meant to give you something you can blast a metal album to, which is funny because this came out before heavy metal. Still, the movie ended up introducing a lot of people to the character. It became a cult hit, funny pun when you know what the movie's about, and it helped launch the career of Arnold Schwarzenegger as an actor. This is the role that really put him on the map. He did a few small cameo roles, Hercules in New York, Stay Hungry, but everybody only really knew him as Mr. Universe. But Conan and The Terminator were what really pushed him into the limelight. While his acting wasn't anything too special, at least in regards to dialogue, his on-screen charisma just clicked with the audience. Conan far more than Terminator. While Terminator was a larger movie, Conan had signs that the guy was more than just a big dumb bodybuilder. Now to get out of the way, I legitimately think Conan the Barbarian is one of the greatest fantasy films ever made. At first glance, you might see it as just a cheesy sword and sorcery movie. When people hear about Conan the Barbarian, they think Ator 3. That's actually not the movie at all. Is it melodramatic at points? Yeah, but it's a sword and sorcery film trying to immerse you in the world it's building. It can't exactly look at the camera and wink every now and then. It's like complaining that a Shakespearean adaptation is too melodramatic. Homie, it just comes with the territory. And really, the film has a lot of refinement to it. The biggest thing to talk about, of course, is the soundtrack. The soundtrack to Conan the Barbarian is scary good. Unironically, one of the best soundtracks in a film ever made. The composer, Basil Polidoris, knocked it out of the park, making the swelling, triumphant score that carries the entire film. It's music that will stick with you after watching it, because it helps carry a lot of the scenes, making certain moments all the more impactful. I'd love to let you guys listen to it, but you know how it is with YouTube. All you have to know is that the soundtrack is a crucial component to the movie. Not just because it's really good, but there are a lot of scenes that run with no dialogue. Entire minutes can go by without any talking. The soundtrack turns these moments into essentially a cinematic opera. bombastic orchestra music on top of all the violence and drama. You don't need a single word to understand what's going on, you're already locked into the film. Now, the actual story of the original Conan film is pretty simple. His village is raided when he's a child by the menacing Thulsa Doom, played by the great James Earl Jones in one of his more underrated roles. While you might be expecting him to just do Darth Vader again, Thulsa is in a league all of his own. The guy is much more quietly menacing, being the leader of a snake cult capable of brainwashing people to follow his every order. He is able to do all sorts of black magic, from curses to demon summoning to even turning himself into a snake. There is a lot Thulsa is capable of, and he contrasts Conan in almost every single way. You see, the central theme of the film is the Riddle of Steel. This is a piece of Conan lore that revolves around his god, Crom. Crom is meant to be this Odin-type figure that revels in strength and willpower, to the point that he won't even bless you if he's begged, because he views that as weakness, and in fact will punish you for it. Crom judges every warrior after death in the halls of Valhalla. If you do not have the answer to the Riddle of Steel, he will then throw you out and you are made a mockery in the afterlife, never allowed eternal glory. And the Riddle of Steel is a question that kind of revolves around the personal philosophy one has around strength. What truly makes someone strong? Conan's father believed it came from your weapon, to put your faith in your sword, since it will never fail you. Thulsa Doom believes it comes from the power you can wield over others, as he's a cult leader with a massive following, capable of assassinating kings if they piss him off. Conan's journey is about trying to find his own answer to the riddle. It's not a literal quest to find it, just a spiritual one. Conan's actual quest is him escaping from slavery, becoming a thief, and then getting revenge on Thulsa for the death of his people. He teams up with the archer Subutai and the warrior woman Valeria, who I mentioned before. They quickly become successful thieves, and their successes make them arrogant enough to try to pull jobs against Thulsa, who quickly shows he isn't as dumb as some of their other targets. Now, the central job is to rescue the daughter of a king that's been brainwashed by the cult and taken hostage. The story itself is, once again, simple, but it's because the details around it bolster it up, around how Conan discovers more of his true purpose and his eventual destiny to become a king by his own hand. It's even foreshadowed with a cryptic scene where he falls into the ruins of an Atlantean kingdom. There he finds the tomb of a general or some kind of royal that was buried with his harem. Conan receives the sword he had, and the skeleton collapses in front of him, as though bowing. He even cleans the sword off, and it's shining and sharp, despite being down there for possibly thousands of years, because it's meant to be his. Now, there's a popular fan theory that the skeleton is actually Kull himself, the king of Atlantis being the one to give Conan his sword and inspire him to become a king by his own hand. I like the theory a lot, but it's not something intended in the film. As far as John Milius was concerned, it was an Atlantean general or some higher-up noble, not Kull. It sucks because there are multiple references to him in the movie. Thulsa Doom isn't even a Conan villain, he's one of Kull's. He was also a skeleton necromancer. Yeah, Thulsa Doom was Skeletor in the Kull books, it was pretty cool. Still, Conan's journey teaches him about the Riddle of Steel, and the answer he comes to is that it's not the power over others or your weapon that gives you strength, but your own willpower. Your own strength that you earn, not given to you. You see this in the final battle of the movie, where Conan prays to Crom, and instead of begging him for strength or to give him the chance to survive as they were heavily outnumbered, he instead tells Crom to either help him or get the fuck out of his way.
And if you do not listen, then the hell with you.
Yeah, Conan tells his own god to either put up or piss off. It's great, peak fiction. And it seems to work, since Conan and his friends are able to fend off Thulsa's warriors. There's even blatant divine intervention. A Valkyrie comes to aid Conan in a fight where he was struggling, and it gives him the chance to get the upper hand and kill the guy. Now, the Valkyrie is a specific character that comes back from the dead, but I can't say who without spoiling it. Just know that they kick major ass in the battle. In a way that sort of calls back to a pretty iconic scene in the beginning of the movie. What is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women. Not sure if it was intentional, but it'd be a cool detail if it was. And all leads to probably one of the most famous final confrontations in cinema. Now, I can't talk about what happens without major spoilers for the original movie. Please sit down and watch Conan the Barbarian before going any further. It's legitimately a phenomenal final scene, and I would hate to spoil it for anybody that has not seen this yet. So after the final battle against Thulsa Doom's warriors, where Valeria comes back from the dead to help as she promised she would, Conan tracks him down back to his fortress. Pushing his way past his followers, Conan confronts Thulsa atop his temple. Thulsa tries to manipulate Conan, saying that he is the reason he grew strong. Killing his family and Valeria gave him the purpose in life to gain strength and find the Riddle of Steel. He even refers to Conan as like his son, saying that he's basically like his father with how much he's impacted his life. And Conan isn't having any of it. That's right, Conan immediately sees through the bullshit and uses the broken sword of his father that was stolen all the way back in the beginning of the film to cut off Thulsa's head. And this isn't one clean swing, it is slow and brutal, hacking away at his neck until he finally rips it off. Conan holds it up in the air for the snake cult to see, and even tosses it down the stairs as one last fuck you. And they just leave, their leader dead, the brainwashing dispelled, and the quest finally over. And you get this shot of Conan sitting on the stairs, contemplating what to do next. He spent his entire life seeking vengeance on Thulsa for what he did to his village and his people, slaughtering his entire family and selling Conan into slavery, and now it's all over. He has no clue what to do or where to go next, but he's still satisfied, because even if he lost his one true purpose in life, he still has the satisfaction of burning it all to the ground, tossing a lantern into the temple and watching the flames grow before riding off. That's Conan the Barbarian. This final scene is easily one of the best finales in cinema, something that really shows how there is a lot more under the hood for Conan than a quick glance will give you. The confrontation right before the decapitation has so much detail that goes unspoken, and you really appreciate how well Arnold can show off the emotions and thoughts of Conan without saying a word. You do see his uncertainty, his hesitation, then his unwavering drive once he finally commits to killing Thulsa. Arnold definitely struggled when it came to speaking. This was his first major role, and he just always has a thick German accent. He got a lot better as the 80s went on, even if he could never fully remove it, and it's pretty fitting that him as an actor was picked to play a character that everyone assumes is a big dumb giant, but is actually very intelligent. Arnold was already a millionaire years before he got into acting. He was Mr. Universe 6 years running, and was a successful real estate mogul at 25. The guy was a lot smarter than people at the time gave him credit for, and that does seep into Conan more than once. He has a lot of good silent moments for Conan, little gestures and the way he would act without speaking that give you a ton of detail about the dude. I already spoke about the final confrontation, which is the most obvious, but there's all sorts of moments like it throughout the film. The scene where he manipulates the cultist to steal his clothes is another obvious one, playing himself off as a shy dope until he can get the guy away from the larger crowd. The way he speaks is very stilted, but his body language in the scene says everything. When he's pretending to be shy and stupid, he's a lot more closed off and kind of turtled into himself. But as soon as he's alone and that switch is flipped, he straightens up and immediately tenses himself. He's ready for combat again. It's such a good contrast where you can understand what's going on in his head. Then you get the short scene later where he's walking around in the disguise and he's a lot more casual and relaxed because he knows it worked. The point being that Arnold just fits as Conan, and he seems to enjoy the character, even spending years trying to set up a new film that followed the Old Man Conan hints from the first movie, of him as a king, slowly growing disgusted with the contentment the throne brought him and wanting a challenge again. Arnold has been pushing for it for a few years now, but the rights to the films are all tied up in all sorts of different ways, so who knows if it'll happen or not. Sucks, but that's the way it is. Regardless, the original film is amazing. Sit down and watch it. Now, the obvious thing to talk about is the sequel, Conan the Destroyer. It's okay. The big thing to talk about is the lack of, well, everything. The original film was pretty heavily R-rated, full of violence and nudity, because that's a Conan story. It was pulpy and all around the fun spectacle of dark fantasy. You got buckets of blood, dismemberment, and titties in basically every story, because it's hype. And the first movie is full of that, with some downright grisly kills at times. Well, John Milius, the director and co-writer of the film, was unavailable for the sequel, so Dino De Laurentiis, one of the producers, offered the movie to Richard Fleischer, along with Dino's daughter, Rafaelia. The original movie was a success, making about $40 million domestic, $50 global, so $90 million altogether off a $20 million budget, and the studio had the idea that they could have made the movie even more successful if they toned down all the elements that made it rated R, so kids and their parents could go see it. It's not completely toothless, but you can see it lean more into lighthearted cheese compared to how serious and epic the first film was. So no more nudity, nowhere near as much blood or gore. It's not like you need those elements to make a good movie, but Conan's a dark fantasy character. He's a ruthless guy, and you can feel that he's toned down for an age rating. I don't hate Conan the Destroyer by any means, it's especially better than that crappy remake, and I guess the best way to put it is you go from Lord of the Rings to Percy Jackson, over the span of one movie. It's kind of a drastic comparison, but the point remains. Destroyer was very clearly the studio trying to pitch Conan as a family movie, which he just ain't. And it's ironic, because I have memories as a kid of my dad sitting me down and watching the original movie. Yeah, it's dark. Yeah, it's violent. Yeah, it's full of tits. That's what makes it fun, especially for a kid. That feeling you're watching something adult for the first time. That reveal of Thulsa Doom sticks in my brain after all these years. The way he just shows up, takes the sword from Conan's father, and cuts off his mother's head. It's not a lighthearted scene, it's fucking grim. But that's why it's memorable. It says all you need for the movie without saying a word. It's that classic producer meddling that sinks a ton of films in their sequels. And on that note, yeah, Conan 2011. So, this is a complicated subject. I don't like 2011 Conan. It's not the worst movie I've ever seen. It's actually got some parts I think are pretty cool, but there's a lot wrong with it. You can tell this is a movie with a ton of suits offering their own input and telling people what to do or not. The original movie allowed for more than a few scenes of quiet, slow-building introspection. You could tell what Conan's thinking without ever needing to be told. You were allowed to think and fall into the world of the movie. 2011 Conan focuses a lot more on spectacle, crazy fight scenes, crazy special effects, crazy CGI, and attempts at 3D. This was during the 3D craze back in the day. And the obvious thing to mention is Jason Momoa as Conan. In terms of casting, I actually like him. Momoa is a good actor and is capable of doing a ton of different tones with his characters. He was intimidating in Game of Thrones, yet showed he has a good sense of humor with Aquaman. The guy could easily nail something like Conan, who can either be scary as hell, or goofy, or introspective. He even kinda looks like what the character is meant to be. The problem is the movie itself doesn't do him any favors, something that even Momoa and the director themselves admit to. They admit filming felt like it was taken over halfway through. The director himself, Marcus Nispel, said he felt like a dog with too many leashes. It was development hell, cuts, the whole 9 yards, and you can feel it. The way they portray Conan himself is also pretty dumbed down, making him just a rage-filled warrior instead of the multi-layered guy he was in the original. I'm all for a mindless bloodbath. I've been enjoying the hell out of Ninja Kamui at the moment, but this is trying to live up to one of the best fantasy films in cinema, so of course my standards are going to be up there. If you just want mindless fun, you'd probably enjoy Conan 2011, but it just doesn't click with me. It makes me wish we had an actual successor to the original. I mean, we got Primal, that's pretty cool. Other than that, nothing. Sort of. Okay, sort of. It's time to address the elephant in the room. So I mentioned that there are more than a few manga influenced by Conan. The sort of traveling warrior going from place to place and kicking ass became a bedrock to old school action manga. That's not to say all of them were inspired by Conan, but one of them for sure was Berserk. Yeah, that Berserk. For those unaware, I like Berserk a lot. It's straight up my favorite thing ever. And Berserk took a lot of influence from a ton of different things. Shoujo manga, Go Nagai, Lovecraftian horror, Gwen Saga, and Western fantasy at large. Specifically, Miura spoke of how he wanted Berserk to sort of be a pulp fantasy story when he was starting off, a tribute to films like Conan the Barbarian. He even says that Guts was made to sort of emulate the character in a way, a warrior with insane strength fighting off the evils of the world with his wits and willpower, a low fantasy setting that treats magic as this unknowable and powerful force, the usage of gore and nudity to keep up that fuck yeah factor, and the entire story revolving around human willpower fighting off things like destiny and gods. Now, Berserk is more horror-focused than Conan, and can definitely be infinitely more grim, but you can see the DNA mixed in there. Miura was able to take a Conan-like barbarian and remix it into his own style. You even see similarities in Berserk from how Guts acts and others see him. A major aspect of Golden Age is that Casca thinks Guts is a mindless killer, and is unaware of how deep the guy's thinking can get. He's not just a fighter, he's much more. Also, the way the politics in the arc work. While the nobles in Midland look down on the Band of the Hawk and see them as savages, they themselves do underhanded and outright cowardly moves to win against their opponents, only to panic once those same tactics are turned on them, once again calling to the hypocrisy of civilization that Conan embodies. And of course, how Guts views his relationship with the world and the God Hand. Guts is outright misotheistic, he hates God, and really what he just sees is the God Hand, and prefers to rely on his own strength to see things through. Now, the new chapters are teasing that they're going to explore spirituality in Berserk with stuff that isn't just the God Hand. That's how it was for a large chunk of the manga. Guts declared war on the God Hand and will kill them with his own sword, taking the apathetic relationship Conan and Crom have and turning it into full-blown rivalry. Guts' love interest is also a warrior woman that he sees as his true bond in life, much like how Conan has had relationships with warrior women, only to tragically lose them. You can see more and more parallels once it's in your brain. Once again, that's not to say Conan is the only influence on Berserk. There's a ton there, and Miura was open about all of them, but absolutely influenced the manga in a way where you kind of view it as a grandfather in some ways. Not all the traits were inherited, it's got some others mixed in there, but you can see they're related, and you'll appreciate both once you find the connection. So really, with this information, you can view Golden Age as Miura reading Rose of Versailles and thinking, this is good, but it needs more demons, and Conan's there kicking ass. Hellraiser demons are pretty sick, let's add those in there too. Also, Lovecraft dimensions are dope. Basically, this band was my spirit animal. Rest in peace, you crazy bastard. Hope you and Howard are having fun conversations up there. Still, that's all I have to say about Conan the Barbarian. It's not just a massively influential movie, but the character continues to influence things to this very day. The recent Doom reboots by Bethesda took influence from Conan, Eternal much more obviously so, with Doomguy being made into the revered warrior king to an order of demon hunting knights. And you can even unlock a skin that's literally just Conan. It's fucking great. Also, Castlevania with Simon Belmont. I mean, he's another pretty obvious one. You can pick up a collection of the stories pretty much anywhere now, and the Savage Sword of Conan run of comics is a pretty good mix of just adaptations and original stuff that feels in line with the style the series goes for. Hell, its interpretation of Red Sonia is still the dominant one people think of when they hear her name. The Titan run of Conan comics are pretty good. I recommend you guys to sit down and watch the movie. Also, check out the series at large. Once you get into it, you'll start seeing how far it managed to stretch even after all those decades. Maybe one day we'll see the Cimmerian himself take some heads again, but for the moment, he's gone quiet. But with how much has taken influence from him, Primal in particular has gotten people to notice Conan all over again, I get the feeling this big brute won't stay gone forever, and I'll be there with Bills on once he makes his return. Until next time, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. See you guys.
Conan, what is best in life? To sneed the threads, to feel blocks breaking beneath you, and to hear the lamentations of their journeys?
Hey, loser. Do you want a shirt? Do you want a t-shirt? I have shirts now. Look in the description for a link to a t-shirt you can buy. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll kill your family. If you don't buy the t-shirt, I'll poison your dog. If you don't buy the t-shirt, you're going to be the only person in town that does not have a t-shirt. Everyone's going to look at you funny. There's going to be social consequences to not having one of these t-shirts. I'm now making express threats of violence against you if you do not buy my t-shirt. I will call the police, tell them how you're not buying my shirt. They're going to plant crack in your house, and they're going to arrest you and then beat you up in a jail cell. Buy my shirt.